So I think we've noted apologies for absence, but just to confirm, one apology, Jeremy Hilton, is an apology for absence. Moving on to item 2, public questions. Not aware of any public questions that have been submitted on this item. 3 is members' questions. Equally not aware of any that have been submitted. So we go on to 4, which is contract procedure rules, pages 1 to 34. Who's presenting this? It says Ian Maudsley, but I can't see Ian Maudsley on my screen.
I think it's me and Rob, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, Steve, go for it.
I'll let Rob go first. Go on, Rob.
All right. So just to put this into the broader context, you're entered into an end-to-end update of the Constitution, and the contract procedure rules and finance procedure rules are part of that, the final part. We brought a number of changes through a few months ago. This will complete the process. The purpose of the contract procedure rules are twofold, really: to make sure the council acts lawfully when procuring goods and services, but also to make sure that we're achieving the best value for local taxpayers. So that's the intent of these. We've made a number of changes to the rules, and the report lists those just to make it easier to understand what it is that we've done. But the key changes from my point of view are, first of all, we've reviewed the thresholds for various types of contracts to make sure that we're focusing efforts where they can have the most impact. And just to reassure you, that was based on a review of our existing contracts to understand the collective volume and value that we're dealing with in those. We've tightened some of the controls around direct awards contracts, including a requirement that any direct awards over £25,000 in value are authorised by me as monitoring officer on the basis of a written report to justify that. We've also intended to increase the visibility of those so that we're reporting them through. We've put some additional rules in place to clarify arrangements for dynamic purchasing systems where we knew there was a little bit of clarity needed and the former rules weren't sufficiently detailed. We've clarified the rules on how officers should calculate total contract value. And then the final significant change is that the rules on grant making have been taken out of the contract procedure rules and moved into the finance procedure rules where they better fit. Worth mentioning that although we're recommending a number of changes at this stage, there are further changes likely to be afoot. The government has promised a procurement white paper, although it isn't clear at this stage how quickly that will come forward. And obviously that's expected to introduce changes that will then need to be adopted and adapted into our rules going forward to see further changes coming forward over the next, possibly the next year, possibly slightly longer than that. Alongside the procurement rules, the team have been developing a wider procurement toolkit to support those who are responsible for procuring contracts, which will include a whole range of guidance to help officers in implementing these rules. And will also have a particular focus on social value, which I know is an area of interest to a number of councillors and has come up recently in discussions in a number of places. So in the meantime, while we're still waiting for those wider changes, we're recommending the changes that are in front of you today. We bring them to you for consideration, and if you're happy with them, those will then go on to County Council in December for adoption into the Constitution.
Sorry, I was on mute there. Thank you for that. Steve, do you have anything else to add on that? You're potentially on mute?
I think just simply that I'm not. Can you hear me?
No, we can hear you. We can hear you.
So I think from my perspective, having a look at them, the previous version was a little bit lengthy and goes a little bit tied up. And I thought what we wanted to do is simplify them a little bit And we did the work on thresholds, as Rob said, getting the contract analysis out there, trying to understand where are the risks, and where in particular the procurement team need to offer greater support for managers across the council. And what we were finding was, because of the thresholds, they were having to provide a bit more advice on stuff, A, that wasn't a risk, and B, that needed to change. So we've kind of played about with the thresholds to help that a little bit more, put a bit more support into that middle ground, particularly between the 25 to 100,000, but move the threshold up a bit on the greater 100,000, where you're kind of doing mini tenders on that kind of stuff. So as Rob said, there are going to be some bigger rules, which we've interestingly heard some estimates of what are going to change. But as of this week, we were told that we don't think that's going to get enough parliamentary time to come in the next year or two. So it might be that actually that takes quite some time for us to see that white paper and the change in the law that would be needed for that. I think we're still in that phase of, we are hoping it comes through next year in 2022, but we're not taking a big bet on that. So these are the version that we'd like to go for with a while. And I'm more than happy, and we've already done a little bit of this work with scrutiny on the toolkit to explain how the toolkit works. Once that's near a completion, either recirculate to this committee so they can see it, or also work with scrutiny on what that toolkit looks like. But that's aimed at making managers' life a bit easier to be able to manage through these set of rules.
Thanks, Steve. Does anyone have any questions or comments? I'm sort of reliant on Simon here to see if there's any hands up gone up on the system.
Wanted to say something. Just having a look around. I can't see any other members at the moment. Oh, and John.
I missed the beginning of that sentence. Who was first?
Colin and John.
Colin first, then John. Colin.
Okay, there's I mean, I've seen this in other places, but I think there's a few reassurances I'd want. So, in terms of when the independent auditors report on the value for money, you know, the incinerator to everyone, there were potentially some lessons learned, which, you know, need to be looked at to see whether there's things that need to be modified. Particularly, I think, in terms of maybe on those very large contracts, how much is available for councillors, etc. So I think it's just an assurance, really, that anything that was in that report has been taken account of that might have an effect. The other question is, you mentioned social value, and I think, I mean, I can't remember now, so hands up, but I think whatever has been, does the impact in terms of climate change need to be beefed up and a bit more to the fore, and to what extent does that influence the awarding of a contract? So I think those couple of things are topical. They may not be answers now, but if it's coming back in the future, then I think those are things that probably need to be highlighted. And I think it would be useful if they are in the report, that they're highlighted when it comes to council, so that members see that actually those things have been taken account of.
Thanks, Colin.
So,
who picked up? Steve.
Yeah, I think the general point on transparency has been strengthened within these contract procedure rules, and not only on the, I mean, as we said at the committee meeting, Colin, when that went to audit, you know, there will always be difference of opinion on the commercial information that on each contract that you share and don't share. That is very hard to legislate for. It's in law what should be legislated for. There's a difference of opinion in terms of what you put out there. What we're trying to say here is we are trying to move to a general trend of making sure all our information is more transparent, and that we aren't trying to hide behind anything here. So I'm happy to beef that up in the narrative that goes along with this. And I'll be also honest, we're also hearing that in the narrative from government. that they want local authorities to be more transparent with the contracts that they're doing. And I would also like to say, once we get ourselves to a bit better position with all that transparency information, maybe we do bring more reports to audit committee for those that are doing a direct award on stuff, to see if there are lessons we can learn from that process and activity. I'm not sure about the climate change one. I think I need to take that away and have a look at the legislation and bring that back with a comment ready for a full council version. Rob's waving. I don't know if Rob, you got a view on that.
I mean, what I will say about change, Colin, is we're subscribing to the social value portal, which will give us a whole range of social value considerations, and climate change is certainly writ large into those. So I would absolutely expect it to be part of that toolkit. In the meantime, of course, all cabinet decisions also are subject to a climate change impact assessment. Although I have to say that's sometimes more thorough than others, and it's one of the things that we recognise that we need to strengthen through this social value approach. But yes, it's certainly built into it.
Cool. I think sorry, I get my teeth stuck in. Colin makes some valid points with regards to how that's presented when the report goes to council, because I think he's right that members will be rightly looking for information on that, and maybe we're not necessarily dive into the detail to see where it's placed. So, Colin, I think it's a fair challenge, and officers have agreed to take that away. John.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it follows on from what we've just been discussing. So in preparation for this meeting, I did have a look at the green paper on public procurement that was published earlier in the year and look for the references concerning social value. And there is a statement that addresses the question that Colin raised, where it says that the national procurement statement that we should have regard to includes delivery of social value, including economic, social and environmental outcomes. So they're including economic and environmental, as well as the word social, within the generic term social value. So I agree with what's just been said, that it would be helpful to highlight this within the covering report, and particularly it might cut down the kind of 12 questions we might get from a resident of Stroud on this subject if it comes to full council. Might save us about half an hour.
I think that's wishful thinking on your part, John, if I'm being honest, but it is a point well made. But Steve, your view is the green paper seems to be stuck at the moment, getting to white paper stage and then legislation.
Yes, and I think what might happen, I mean, this is only guesswork from colleagues at the moment, is that they'll find other ways to make some of those changes. So I think the social value one is a really good point. They might not use a white paper to make the social value changes. They'll find it in other ways. We are already on that foot. We're already on that journey in terms of that improvement, as Rob has already mentioned. So some of the things that, so for example, at the moment in the procurement regulations that were agreed in 2015, there's something called the light touch regime, which is about the way that it's mostly social care contracts, and they have different sets of thresholds for social care contracts. We were told in the green paper that the light touch regime will go, but obviously if it takes until 2023 or even 2024 to make those changes, I think they'll try and find a way through health working and other kind of joint working to remove some of those limitations or issues. I must say it's not an issue for us, but I think the government will have a look at what's important in that green paper and what else can they make changes in other legislation that we're going to influence on here. We just have to keep an eye on that, and we'll keep the committee and council updated on that.
I think it's probably worth just reflecting maybe on the statement that John's picked up from the green paper somewhere in the covering report to council. I think that's a useful thing to make reference to pick up John's point, and I think Colin's point, that we are reflecting the changes that we know are coming down the pipeline. So I think that's a fair comment. Anyone else got their hands up?
We've got a couple of people. We've got Andrew and Philip.
Okay, Andrew first, and then Phil.
Yeah, just really briefly, just to kind of pick up on Colin's point. The environmental is really important, but I think the focus, and this can help with the narrative when it comes to council, is on the procurement toolkit, which will be picked up by, or is being picked up by COSC. And I really think that is where we need to make our comprehensive statements on the environment, things like the single-use plastics, but also other things as well. So I think just to reinforce Colin's point, really. Thanks.
Thank you, Phil.
Thank you, Mark. It's just to shed a bit of light, really, on the social value aspects that are already being used at the county council. I took a paper to Cabinet last week about the dynamic purchasing system for the award of transport contracts. And within that paper, and certainly regarding some of the answers that were given prior to Cabinet, it actually pointed out what the GCC strategic procurement team are already doing to include the scoring of social value. And it's actually based on what's called these ESG measures. So they are environmental and social governance. And it's to enable a fair comparison between bids where social value is given a larger consideration, not necessarily the largest consideration. And that approach, I'm assured, is being trialled across specific contracts with a view to full implementation in 2022. So there's definitely things happening. I was told about these things by officers because I was concerned as I took the report. So it is definitely happening. So it needs probably to be reflected within the Constitution. But I hope that just sheds a little bit of light on it anyway. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. Any more hands on this one?
Report.
Yeah. Any more hands up on this one?
No one else, Mark.
But okay, so we all happy to note this report and with all the caveats we placed on the covering report in particular for it to go forward to the council meeting. I'll do it in the same way they do in Parliament, which is anyone who has any objections, please shout now. No? Okay, I'm going to take that as a go. 5, finance procedure rules. Who's covering this one? Rob and Steve again, is it?
This one's Steve, I think.
Definitely
Okay.
Steve.
I think this one's a little simpler, if I'm honest. I don't think there's much wrong with our current financial procedure rules. There's been a little bit of tidying up throughout the procedure rules. We just took the opportunity at the same time as we were doing the contract procedure rules to do the financial procedure rules. And the council has done in a similar way to that we have the toolkit or are developing the toolkit. We've had for a number of years things called accounting instructions. Now, the status of those accounting instructions, I have questioned a little bit because, to my mind, they are a set of guidance documents for officers. They are not rules. So these are the rules that are before the committee today. The finance manual is what we're now going to call it, is the guidance, and I think that helps the Constitution differentiate the difference between the rules and the guidance and support to those rules. And therefore, we've changed some of the terminology to make that a little bit clearer. We've made some changes to minor parts in terms of the treatment of over and underspends to actually reflect what the council is doing as opposed to what it thought it was doing in its rules, because we don't carry forward overspends. We deal with them in year, normally treated, using our reserves or whatever to sort them out. We don't say to children's, therefore the 12 million that you overspend carries forward and you have to tackle that again in the next year. That's not how the council has been operating for a number of years. So we've tried to reflect that, and then you'll see a number of other job titles and other various minimal changes. And as Mark made reference, Rob made reference to on the original one, we've put the grant stuff into financial procedure rules in a bit of a clearer way because it was mentioned briefly but not in full detail. So happy to take questions on those changes.
Thanks for that, Steve. One question from me. There's a bit of a bun fight going on nationally between the LGA and CITFA regarding some of the Treasury management guidance that CITFA issue. I don't know whether at some point we'll have to reflect that, because clearly the government seems to be wanting to take a quite hard line on this.
Yeah, and for 22-23, it's advisory, if you like, and you can make changes. What CITFA have said is they want it built in from 23-24. I have to say, in the County Council's defence, this is mostly around your approach to borrowing and how you deal with borrowing. We've had a very, very positive approach to borrowing. So when we put external stroke internal borrowing in our reports, it's nearly all internal borrowing because we've got cash flow improvements. So the council made some improvements to its financial position a number of years ago when it paid off debt rather than taking out new debt, and that's really benefited now. So I'm happy to bring back a separate report on the changes that are going through on the CITFA stuff, Mark, but it's only advisory for the first year. So that I'm reading into that might give them time to sort out their differences. And by which time, when it comes for full implementation in 23-24, we'll know which way it's going to go.
Yeah, no, my general view, I was in a meeting about it yesterday, is it seems to impact more on districts than it does on upper tier authorities, but it's clearly a schism between the two organisations at the moment. There's another hand that's gone up. I can't see who that is. Who have we got?
Colin and Lyndon.
Colin and Lyndon. Colin.
It's just a quick one, really, because I saw these rules and they seemed fine. It's just a question of the difference between rules and guidance. And if the guidance changes, clearly that doesn't come back to Constitution. So how do we, if there are changes that are reasonably significant, where would they go just for information or whatever? So it's just that, and just to see how this changes, how we as councillors see what changes are made. That's all.
Yeah, and primarily that's between me and Rob to work out. You know, Rob as monitor officer, me as 151 officer, to work out if somebody wants to update the guidance and say, actually, best practice is that you do this quarterly rather than monthly, like running monitoring reports or something like that. Well, if is it in the Constitution? Therefore, you can't just change it in your guidance, or is it a technical update that is kind of updating for best practice but doesn't actually change the rules? So, we publish our accounting instructions, as they're currently called, on the internet, so they're available, and we get FOI'd sometimes about other councils that might want to see them. So they're not a private document. What we try to help managers with is, this is the interpretation of how the rules work and how you do your job to live within those rules. And actually, what we shouldn't be doing is changing the guidance that fundamentally would affect the rules. So they should sit hand in glove. And if the guidance is changing, it should still sit inside those same set of rules, kind of stuff. So
right. I think
some process.
I think what I was saying is not to slow things down by bringing everything back to Constitution Committee. It's just if the guidance changes, and it's your judgment, but that should go to, I don't know, either corporate cabinet or audit, just to say the guidance has changed. I mean, it depends what it is, clearly. But
so the council's constitution is where the differentiation is, because I get the authority to rule on the rules and advise, as 151 officer, advise the council on the best way to work within the rules. The guidance are an officer document, so you would not put that in front of cabinet, council, audit committee, or whatever. By all means, happy to share for information at a later date or whatever. And I particularly would, as soon as we got the finance manual up and running, just like we've done on the toolkit, we might do the same sort of stuff with the finance manual, but you wouldn't put them under the authorization of those relevant committees, because that's not part of the council's constitution. It's outside that.
No, I wasn't asking for that. I was just asking to be kept up to date with changes so that if there was significant, there could be a question asked. That's all. I understand that's why I'm raising the question, is how are we kept informed of changes in the rules which don't change the constitution? And it's not for us to decide, but just to know what's going on.
Okay.
Cool. All right, thanks. Useful. Lyndon.
Yeah, it's page 61, and it's specific to security of assets at point C11. 2 or 3 points to make there. In effect, it says directors must maintain an asset register and may write off inventory with a value up to £5,000. First of all, I'm guessing that £5,000 figure is a written down value. If it is, that probably would help if that were confirmed. Secondly, how would this relate to an aggregating of stock? Now, what I'm thinking about is the potential disposal of, let's say, laptops. You're not going to sell them off individually at £5,000 each, but you could have 5,000 laptops you're selling off at £100 each. Now, that is significantly more than 5,000. So that's really covered off there. And the third point is, what it doesn't do really is have any accountability when you've got a book loss. So that's a sale made at a lower level than it sits in your books at. Perhaps we should also include where the book loss is in excess of £5,000. So in other words, when something's depreciated, let's say you've got a vehicle bought at 20,000 in the books at 8, but sold at 4. Now, or sold at 6, let's say. There's still a book loss there. I'm just wondering if we shouldn't cover that off. And I'm just, we've had instances like this before. So there's 3 points there. I think we should reflect on at C11.
Okay, I think you're right in terms of the collective sale. It's the decision, isn't it? So if you're making a decision, the director's making a decision that affects the council by more than 5,000, be it 1 item, 2 items, or 100 items, that decision should be recorded. And if it's more than 5,000, it would probably go up to the relevant cabinet member or whatever to sign that off. In terms of the book loss stuff, yeah, I don't think I disagree. I think with a couple of alterations on words, we could include net loss in that as well to include that stuff. It's quite rare, to be honest, that it happens. But for the alteration of a couple of words, I don't think I'm not sure I'm going to get too hung up on that. And we probably know about most of them through discussions that we've been having. Fire engines or various other stuff that might be coming around over the next few years and months. This isn't a big risk area that we're tackling, to be fair. So, Lyndon, just picking up your points, for a bit of alteration of the right words, I'm happy to take that away and have a look at those.
Cool, thank you. Anyone got any other questions or comments? Not seeing the hands up icon.
No one else.
In that case, are we all happy for this to go forward to council? Yeah, I'm not hearing any dissent on that one. Okay, that's it. Thank you all very much. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Matt, can you turn the recording off? All right, you there, Max?
Yep. Is it finished now?
All right, just me. Yeah. So you turn it off?
Yep. Stream is ended.
All right, that's great. Thanks for your help this morning. That's good. I'll write those minutes now. Some of that was a bit